we found Travis fairly quickly, and I was so excited. I was a huge fan of Kubo and the Two Strings. I absolutely loved it. I just thought it was incredible. So I was thrilled, and when I first met with him, we had a real meeting of the minds. I think we both really fell in love with the same thing about the story. I was always watching movies, and I loved all of the characters I was seeing, but more often than not, they were guys. It was, a boy's coming-of-age story. It was a boy going on an adventure. And as a young girl, I wanted to see girls going on adventures. I didn't just want to see princesses. I was never really into princesses. And I wanted to see a young female character who was weird and different and didn't fit into any of the typical boxes. She wasn't a cheerleader, she wasn't an athlete, she wasn't a nerd, she wasn't any one thing. The thing that I loved about Charlie and what Charlie's now become is that she's a bit of everything, and that's what makes her feel like such an outsider. If she was just a nerd, she'd weirdly fit in more. But it's that she's a bit of everything. She's a bit of a tomboy, but she's still a girl. She is an athlete. She used to do her diving, but she's just kind of got all of these different pieces, and her dad was always the one who saw all of those pieces and could reconcile them and make her one whole. And I like the idea that if you lose the person that understands you and can translate you, you kind of lose a sense of who you are, and that she's struggling to accept all of the pieces of who she is and find herself again. When B comes along, it's almost like finding a puppy who needs her and needs looking after. She is kind of forced to open her heart to him. She kind of has closed her heart after the death of her dad, and you can see it with her friends where she's kind of shut herself off a little bit. And B, because he's broken down and rusty and doesn't know what he's doing and can't speak, the fact that he needs her forces her to open her heart to him, forces her to take care of him, and in taking care of him, she kind of heals herself. She's not your typical girl. And that's what I loved about Hailee, is that she can play being a tomboy without being boyish. She's still very feminine and still very much a girl. And that's something that I think is important for girls to see. I think too often female characters are delineated into like tomboy and, girly girl. And she, for me, had something lovely about her because she's got this real mix of beauty and femininity and also like a real tough edge. So I was thrilled. I was thrilled that they cast Hailee. And as soon as we got John Cena, I realized that was completely going to work. He's so funny. He's got such good comic timing, surprisingly. But also just has a real warmth and a likability, as well as obviously being unbelievably terrifying and tough. So I think he straddles that line incredibly well, where he can be both the good guy and the bad guy. Michael Bay in the last 5 films has created such a close bond between Optimus Prime and Bumblebee and the audiences. And that's really what this movie is feeding off of. Although it's a smaller standalone movie, it's built on that relationship that Michael Bay has created between the cinema going public and Bumblebee. It's based on that love, and it's kind of being born out of that. So even though it's a separate, small prequel, it's very much feeding off of that and going on its own separate path.
I play Charlie Watson, a character who is, well, I guess we find her in a place that she's sort of broken and confused, and she has an old soul, but she's young at heart at the same time. She has this beautiful journey of really finding who she is and what makes her happy and what she has to live for. And early on, we meet her and we find out that she lost her dad, and her dad was her best friend, and her dad was her ticket to everything. It was her ticket to freedom, because he taught her how to work on a car, and a car meant freedom, and that's what they did together. That was their thing. And there was a very special, unique relationship there, and when she lost it, she lost part of herself. And so this movie is basically a journey of her finding that missing piece, and she finds it, and that happens to be a robot by the name of Bumblebee. Charlie transforms just as much as this robot does, and from beginning, middle to end, from morning to night of every single day, there's some sort of transformation she makes as a person, as a young girl to a young woman, and B helps her discover those things about herself and about her life in general. There is a character named Memo, played by George Lendeborg, who is trying to befriend Charlie for a while, like actively pursuing whether it's a friendship or a relationship, just some kind of connection with this girl, and he can't seem to get a hold of her because she's just always either in her own world of everything going on in her life, or just has somewhere to be and somewhere to go and something to accomplish. But until they sort of, I guess until Memo is let in on this, secret and discovery that is Bumblebee, she has no choice but to keep him close, to make sure that secret doesn't get out. But they become the best of friends. Charlie lives at home with her mom, Sally, and her little brother, Otis, played by Jason Drucker, who's actually played my little brother before in another movie, which is kind of crazy because we've both grown up so much since, and, we had that brother-sister dynamic down. So that was fun to sort of reunite with him. Pamela Adlon, who is my mother in the movie, is like my new best friend. She is absolutely hilarious and amazing. John Cena. What about John Cena? I don't even know where to begin. First of all, his hands are like the size of my head. That's like the first thing I picked up on. I was very excited to meet him. Travis is, I guess, I don't even know where to begin. He's such an incredible, he's just, his vision is so clear on what he has wanted this to be from day one. And as much as it's a world that we're living in that's already been created, he's really doing what he can to sort of put his own sort of spin on it. Obviously, with his background in animation, he has an incredible sense of being able to see a drawing on the page brought to life. This dynamic between Charlie and Bumblebee in this movie is so incredible because you can see with just a look between the two of them how much love there is and how much he cares and how much she cares. And it's crazy to think that, with my imagination, I've built my own relationship with this robot that doesn't exist, and I've fallen in love with him, and I think he's incredible. And I can see that when he's brought to life, people feel that. And he's also super badass and amazing. When it was announced that I was going to be a part of this film, I saw just over socials the reactions and how crazy devoted the fans of this franchise are. So I feel incredibly honored to be a part of it. Because it really truly feels like something special. And yeah, I'm excited. I can't wait for everyone to see this.
I think it was when I was 3 that I began playing with all like the Bumblebee cars and like the Optimus Prime mask. So I mean, I've always been a fan of it, but now I get to work on it, so that's even cooler. I'm really excited. Well, I play Otis Watson, Charlie's brother, and our relationship is like any other typical brother-sister. I'm, you know, a bit bratty, and she's going through a bit of a identity crisis. She's still mourning the loss of our father, and her friends turned on her because she's going through some personal changes. But I'm just a kid trying to have fun. So that's when Bumblebee comes in, and it kind of forces us to work together, and that's how our relationship kind of grows. Well, they have 8 Volkswagens, and I mean, being in it was absolutely crazy because I was just thinking in my head, like, this is Bumblebee. And I just imagine it like just transforming slowly. I mean, it was kind of surreal because I was in the original Bumblebee. Yeah, I mean, it obviously wasn't real. Like, it obviously wasn't going to transform. It was just the feeling of being inside of it that was so special. I know that in the 80s, people had really big hair, funny clothes in my opinion, and I mean, I know that some of the best rock songs came from the 80s, like Back in Black, AC/DC, Rock Me Like a Hurricane, Scorpion. Oh my gosh, I can't think of the last one. It's like my favorite one. Yeah, but I mean, I listen to a lot of rock, so obviously, you know, I know a bit about the 80s, and I mean, to actually experience it now is even cooler. Hailee, who plays Charlie, I mean, she's just such a pleasure to work with. She's just so kind and so nice, and it's actually not my first time working with her. I actually worked on an indie film in 2013 with her, so that's when, when I heard that I was gonna work with her again, I was so excited. Pamela, who plays Sally, I mean, you just can't keep up with her. She's just so funny, and it's just who she is. She's kind of like the Energizer Bunny. She just does not run out. She's just so funny. Well, meeting John Cena was kind of insane because, I mean, he's a big wrestler and also like a big upcoming actor now. And I mean, I see him on TV all the time. I see him on the internet all the time. So kind of seeing him in person was kind of crazy. And you know, just getting to meet him for 3 minutes made it even crazier. Like, he's so cool. And honestly, I just wish I had at least like one scene with him. Well, I mean, what excited me, I mean, it's the Transformers. Like, it's such a cool project, and it's like robots that turn into cars that are just big fighting machines. I don't know if you can get any better than that. I mean, I've always been a fan of it, so I was really, really excited that I was going to be able to work on one of the movies.
Agent Burns is not supposed to be seen or heard or recognized. He is head of Sector 7, and Sector 7 is responsible for all of the things that the masses don't know about. It is keeping a lid on the nation's problems and the nation's secrets, and he does a damn good job at that. I think the universe is so interesting, and that's why Transformers has been such a global success, is because the idea of this franchise coming to life and in the way in which they did it. I mean, it started out way back about the story of with a boy wanting a car, a 16-year-old finding a nice-looking car, and it goes from there. And then you learn about the protectors of the universe and the evils of the universe and all the back and forth crazy action that has been the Transformers franchise. And when I saw this and the fact that it takes it back even earlier and almost recaptures that unreal feeling when you get your independence as an adolescent, as a teenager. In watching the movie, you're attached to the story so much that you gravitate towards the characters. You have thoughts of if Burns is a villain or a hero, what side of the line he fights on. You gravitate towards Bumblebee and form a relationship with Bumblebee and Charlie and their relationship. And Mimo comes out of nowhere and does awesome. And the relationship between an adolescent and their parents, especially in a home that's separated, like the loss of a family member. You go through all of this stuff. It's I like that stuff more. I think the action is extremely powerful, but I love the characters. The movie is set in a time machine in history. So, and I think because now you have a block of movies that have been done, you really do get to maybe shift gears a little bit, go back and focus more and extend some of these moments out. So it's I keep telling everybody the movie will have a nice fast pace to it, but it will also be digestible and it will lean heavily on story as well. And I always hark back to the first one just because I love the tale of a boy in his car. So I think this is more focused on a scenario like that. Hailee is phenomenal. Hailee is powerful when she needs to be. I think she'll be a symbol for young women of all ages to look to for strength. But at the same time, she plays a teenager. Teenagers have those moments of weakness, of vulnerability, where when they're embarrassed, it feels like your world is over. And she's also involved in music as well, and I think the creation on both sides keeps her mind open, keeps her emotions heightened, and she's phenomenal. She really is. When Transformers hit, I was right in the middle of it. I vividly remember the transforming Optimus Prime, because that was I think the one, having 4 brothers, I think that was the one toy I got was Optimus Prime. But he was the baddest of the badasses, so at least I had the best one. But it was crazy to see them go from an animated series, and I can still hear Optimus's voice. It was so memorable, so iconic. And then to be revitalized as a movie franchise, and you think like, how are they going to do that? And Michael Bay makes this unbelievably acceptable world out of this crazy concept to where it's now a wonderful, entertaining franchise. So I've kind of followed the story arc the whole way through, and it's weird that it's come in such a full circle and it's now headed back to like the beginning, set in the time period where I first fell in love with Transformers. I think the audience resonates with Bumblebee because he's an underdog. He's smaller, he can't talk, so he's immediately has a deficiency and an obstacle to overcome. And he's very endearing. Like, he's a warrior, an absolute ass-kicking warrior in a very small frame, but he always tries to make these personal connections with the people he's protecting. And I think they've gone above and beyond with his Bumblebee's personality to send that message.
I grew up watching the Transformers cartoons when they would play on Cartoon Network, and also the original Michael Bay films or movies that really had an impression on my childhood, and they were like parts, they were my favorite movies. So to be a part of it was kind of crazy. I was taken in to lead something that I grew up loving. I think Travis Knight was a wonderful choice. I mean, from his background in stop motion and animation, I think it gave him real insight into making sure that Bumblebee is taken seriously and also feels very humanistic and that you could care for him. His work in Kubo and Two Strings and in Coraline, I think his work on Kubo and Two Strings and Coraline was just really special and just showing heart in these type of animated movies. And obviously there's a lot of CGI, but I feel like he brings the same principles that he learned over there into Bumblebee. People love Bumblebee. We from the first movie, we all thought this is the funny guy. I think people like him. I like him. I think Bumblebee shows just like a crazy amount of charisma. He's always like funny without saying much since he doesn't really talk. But yeah, he's like everybody's best friend, and I'm just happy that we're able to see this origin of him, and we get to see more of what made him the Bumblebee that we know and love from the previous movies. The amount of hard starts in the script, I feel like they really decided to take this film into a different direction and show something very simplistic and show what it feels like to be lost. And I feel like they narrowed in on these type of like themes, and it showed itself through. Memo is new to the neighborhood. I move in across the street from Charlie, and I have a little bit of a crush on her. I work adjacent to her store, and he's a nerd. He's cool. I think he's very charming, very funny, but he's ultimately a good guy. I think Memo is what people would classify as a nerd, but I think if you wait 20 or 30 years, this is a guy who becomes the boss of those companies. He's a guy who hasn't reached his prime just yet, but he's just a good guy, and yeah, he's not scared. Being sucked into this big adventure, he's ready to take it on full force for the people that he loves. Charlie recently is dealing with the loss of her father in the movie, and also finding a space robot to be her car. So she doesn't really have time for a boyfriend or to be entertaining dates, but it doesn't stop me from trying. So it's kind of like, sometimes you want to be in a relationship or you like somebody, but people are dealing with stuff, and that's cool. But I feel like Memo stays very resilient and sees more than just someone that he likes. He generally, regardless of what the dynamic is interested in spending time with Charlie. What Travis wanted to do was make sure that everything was very true to Gen 1, which is the version or the iteration of Transformers that he grew up watching. So what we do in this film is we take it, Michael Bay did a great job at having his interpretation of the Transformers, but what Travis does is he really brings it back to the original, to the roots of what Transformers looked like and felt like. Hailee's number one. She's a fantastic actor who's been doing it much longer than a lot of people that I've worked with. I mean, she was, in True Grit and Pitch Perfect, all these things. She's a professional, and she's been a professional for a long time, and I think it really shows while we were shooting just how much she knows where she wants to be, how much she demands, and as far as the professionalism of everybody. And I think she really just set a good tone, and I learned a lot just from watching her. I think audiences will enjoy seeing a new side of B. I think people will sympathize and empathize with this robot, and I think that's kind of cool.
We felt it was important that this movie was very differentiated, and that the idea of doing, in a sense, a coming-of-age story for both Bumblebee and for Charlie was an interesting idea. Charlie is at that very turning 18, and trying to cope with the loss of her dad a few years before, and what a lot of 18-year-olds are trying to cope with. And ironically, she meets a robot who allows her to become who she is, in a sense. And you know, that duality, both characters are going through that, you know, allowed us to really get into just much more, it allowed us to slow the movie down and really sit in the emotional aspects of it. I think that Christina came up with the heart of it, you know, and I think that's shown through. And you know, a pitch is always so much different than eventually a script, but what she was able to convey in a very small treatment, if you would, that this was going to be an emotional ride. You know, one of the things we've never been able to do, in a sense, is give a Transformer a full character. If you look at, traditionally, they're archetypes. You know, Optimus is wise and good and all-knowing, and Bumblebee's the eager teenager who's ready to go, and Ironhide's the guy who wants to shoot everybody up. You know, and so each one has a very distinct character, but we were never able to sit in there and watch it develop and watch it change and watch it be affected by what was going on. They are who they are in the previous movies and in the animation. This was an attempt to allow the audience to get to know a Transformer in a way they've never had before. Charlie lost her dad a couple years before. Her mom has found a new love. Her younger brother has related to the new dad, if you would, and she's feeling left out. And teenagers can often have that experience without having the family. So in a way, she's having the family issue on top of what it is like to be 17, 18 years old and trying to figure out who you are. And I think what Hailee, you know, she's a lot different than Charlie in person. She's just a phenomenal actress. She clearly has the charm and charisma that Charlie has, but she is, and I think a lot of the strength of Charlie comes through innately in who Hailee is. George is just charming. You know, we saw that immediately in his test. Again, because they're somewhat untested as actors, you don't quite know what that's going to mean. So you're really going with sort of first gut reaction to who they are. And he was just charming and fun, and you knew you were going to like him. The fans love different kinds of transformations, and that's one of the things we worked hard on in this movie, to give them things that they've never seen before. I know that the depth of emotional response that we're going to get out of Bumblebee is a direct product of the fact that he's worked with inanimate objects. You know, he's had to coax from an inanimate object something that has personality, if you would, right? In this case, Bumblebee's not an inanimate object, but he is somebody who's sitting in the corner of a barn when we're corner of the garage when we're shooting, who's not there. So for Travis to have it so clear in his mind exactly what that character is doing, what he's feeling, how he's reacting, all that stuff, I think once we see the movie complete enough, I think we're going to be blown away by the level of sophistication in terms of emotional communications that Bumblebee's going to be capable of. What attracted me to Travis was the fact that he had started a business that was very successful. Leica is a really cutting-edge stop-motion animation company who have done 4 really good movies, which is not easy to make one good movie. And he had directed the last one, Kubo and His Two Strings, and I'd seen that movie, and that's what got me started, was, you know, I thought, wow, what a movie. His sensibility and what that company stands for felt right for this project. When we sat down and talked, what he focused on emotionally and the kind of thing he was trying to evoke, like an Amblin movie and like what was it like to grow up in the 80s, he really had that down. I'm older than he is, so I don't have the 80s as a child, but he had that in his experience. So, you know, between the qualities that he had and exhibited in Leica and his gut instincts and what he thought was important is what convinced us that he's the right guy.
The 80s has a very specific flavor, which is great for filmmaking purposes because, you know, there is a look that you know, people recognize and that's interesting. It's also very specifically the 80s in California, which is a whole thing unto itself. I grew up in California and, you know, beach town California in that period, wardrobe, the music, that was a very specific thing, probably very different from what was happening on the East Coast of the United States in that time or anywhere else. So I think, you know, that was interesting to us too. The idea was, let's give Bumblebee his due. Let's give him the spotlight and put him front and center, and, you know, see how that goes. So it was always, I think these 2 characters will be in every movie in some way, shape, or form. But I think because of the communication issue too with Bumblebee, I think that gives us an interesting challenge also, and it's you know, it's a character that hasn't been fully realized in the other movies, so it gives us a chance to show the audience the full scope of that character, and that will be something different for them. Bumblebee seems to be the character that appeals to younger kids because you know, he is more childlike in his behavior. He's more exuberant. He's more playful. He doesn't have the burden of leadership that Optimus has. And so, in a weird way, he's almost a child to Optimus as opposed to his sidekick or his partner. Obviously, his color is a very important part. The yellow is vibrant and it speaks perfectly to his personality. John travels every day of the week. He goes to approximately 150 countries for wrestling events around the world. He's never there more than 24 hours. By his own admission, he doesn't really live anywhere, you know, although technically he's from Tampa. When we approached him, you know, we thought, how would it even be possible with a schedule like that? But as it turns out, he is a Transformers fan. And as we learn every day, because he talks about the past movies and what he loves about this movie, because it's, you know, recognizing the lore from other mythologies in the Transformers universe that he is well aware of. To have a collaborator like Hailee, who, I mean, I've made a lot of movies. I've never really seen somebody with her level, her chops. I mean, I've put it this way. I've never worked on a movie where people from every department of the crew on a set have, in passing me or coming directly or whatever, have said, this girl is flat out amazing as an actress. The head of the studio and Lorenzo and I, after our meeting, after we got done with all of our meetings, said, write the name of the director you think is the best guy for this job on a buck slip. Don't show it to anybody, and then we'll hand them to each other to see if we all pick the same person. And funny enough, every slip had Travis, which never happens, right? And we, without consulting each other, without talking it through, we did the meetings. Who do you like? And it was Travis. And you know, the reasons are many, but more than anything, what you want is somebody, you know, with confidence in their vision.
That kind of experience of bringing all those things into play, the imagination, the wonder, the heart, and the laughter, that was something that I wanted to bring to this film. It's set in the 80s, and so it felt like it was the perfect way to tip the hat to those classic Amblin-esque films, those great Steven Spielberg coming-of-age fantasies of the 80s, and to bring that aspect of filmmaking into this franchise, which, you know, has had a different aesthetic for years, to still honor that, but to bring something new to it, and that was what we tried to do with this film. Well, I think the thing that's always been interesting about Bumblebee as a character in the films is that he's clearly the Autobot. He's clearly the Transformer that has the most affinity for humanity. He's the one who has the deepest connection with humans. And I think that's fascinating. Why is that? What is it about us that he finds interesting? What is it about him that forges such a deep connection with us? And so one of the things that we're able to do in this movie is to explore how that happened, how he was able to do that. What is it about him that is able to connect with us so deeply, and what's unique about him? You know, being able to take the time in a film where it's not filled with dozens and dozens of awesome robots, but it's just this one character that we're able to focus in on and figure out, what does he think? How does he feel? What makes him tick? I love exploring characters, and that's what we do in this film. We really get to understand who Bumblebee is and why people should and do love him. The thought was maybe to go in a different direction on a Bumblebee solo film. And as I was discussing it with Lorenzo de Bonaventura, the producer, you know, he had mentioned Amblin as something of a touchstone. And for me, that was ringing all the right bells. You know, I was a child of the 80s. I grew up loving those classic Spielbergian coming-of-age tales. You know, all things Amblin, that essentially defined my childhood. And, you know, in fact, the first film that I remember that really moved me to tears was E.T. I saw it in the movie theater when I was around 8 years old with my mom, and by the end of it, I was just absolutely weeping, sobbing in my mom's arms. And to be able to tell that kind of a story, to be able to take this big, expansive franchise, this huge canvas that Michael and the team have built over the last decade, and to focus in on a tiny corner of that canvas and tell something that's more intimate, more character-driven, and more evocative of those great classic coming-of-age stories of the 80s, that was something that was really exciting to me. When we find Bumblebee at the beginning of the film, he's a savage, brutal warrior who's been essentially hollowed out by a life of violence. And to a degree, he's lost his empathy, which is not the Bumblebee that most people know from the franchise. Bumblebee is the one Autobot, the one Transformer, who has the most affinity for humanity. He's the one who has the deepest and truest connection with humans. And so I started asking myself, well, how did he get that way? Was he always that way, or was he different? And what led to him having this kind of affinity for humanity? And that's one of the core stories that we explore in this film, is that who he was before we got to know him, and how did he become the Bumblebee that we know and love. And that's one of the things that this film explores. You know, the film it's a two-hander. So we have Charlie, who's this disaffected teen who's been marginalized by her family and by her friends and by the people in her community, and she's dealing with her own tragedy. She's a broken soul, and the way I looked at it was they're essentially, two sides of the same coin. And he has his experiences which have essentially calloused him. It's made him. It's desensitized him to humanity. He's lost his empathy, and in a lot of ways, Charlie is too. And so the film is fundamentally a love story about how these two broken souls find each other, and through the course of getting to know each other, they heal each other, they make each other whole. It's a primal story in effect. It really is a love story, and it delves into this idea that, yeah, love hurts. We all know that. It's painful. It's hard to open yourself up and be vulnerable to love someone, but it also is the thing that heals us and gives our lives meaning. And that's the core theme at the center of the film. When we find Bumblebee at the beginning of the film, he's been mistreated. He's been pushed aside. He's been, he's been neglected, and he's been hunted, and he really has seen the worst of people, and it's made him cold. It's made him, he's essentially kind of pushed back, turned his back on the world, retreated to a corner, and just wants to get away, just wants to hide, just wants to be a robot in disguise and get away from all this madness. And that's really no way to live, and that really does get to the core of what love what the absence of love can mean for us. I was working with Hailee Steinfeld as the lead of my film, and it was just kind of those ideas were right there from the moment I read the script. And she is a marvel. She's astonishing. I mean, she really is so incredibly, extraordinarily talented. She can do anything, and she breaks your heart. She makes you laugh. There's always something interesting happening on her face. You can tell that there's just the brain, the wheels are always turning. She's just incredible. She's an exceptional actress, and she really is the heart and soul of this movie. They say that it's the old saw that 90% of your job is casting, and that's true for the crew, for the artists that you hire, and obviously for the actors. If you can find the right person who really connects with the character and can bring that character to life, a lot of your job is done. And I really did luck out in the fact that my leading lady is one of the best actresses on the planet. It was an extraordinary experience. I mean, I've done a lot of stuff in my career over the 20 years I've worked in animation and film. But this last year working on Bumblebee, it was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. So our approach to the 80s was to treat it sympathetically and to treat it sincerely, and there's absolute love in it. You can see it in the production design, in the costumes, in the hair and makeup. You can hear it in the soundtrack and the music that we're using. It was a real place, it was a real time, and we wanted to make sure it did not feel like we were lampooning it, that it was a cartoon. And so we treated it seriously. Once I saw George's audition, it was like, okay, well, there's our guy. Just because he is funny and sharp and charming, and he's got this megawatt smile, and yet he's not necessarily someone you would think immediately like, oh yeah, that's the leading man. But he is so charming, and he really, is endearing, and he brings the character to life in a beautiful way. And you know, as a director, really, that's what you hope for, is someone who can see beyond what's written on the page and find depth and dimension to who this character is. And he can do that. He's an exceptionally young actor. When I saw Jason Drucker's audition, it was like, all right, well, there's our Otis. And it was just one of those things where it was like, it was the perfect thing. Every choice he made was right. He seems so real, and he's just really, really funny. And he's like a grown man in a little man's body. So he's so great in the film. He's totally funny, and I love him. I think he's great. Pamela Adlon is a force of nature. You know, I've been a fan of Pam since long before we worked together. I just think she's so sharp and so funny, but she's also a great actor. She's really, really talented, and you know, it's Charlie's mom, Sally. You know, it's one of those things where it could easily devolve into caricature unless you get someone who can find the different shades of the character to bring to life and know what to play. Know when you know, to be that kind of stereotypical mom, and know when to find nuance and subtlety in the performance. And you know, Pamela, I mean, she's just so naturally gifted and so talented, and she really understood who these characters were. You know, she's a mom. She's got teen girls of her own. She grew up in the 80s like I did, so she has those memories of those experiences. They understood very early on what this film was, and they've just done astonishing work. I think when people see the performance that the animators at ILM were able to get out of Bumblebee, this assemblage of you know, steel, metal, this thing that never really existed, this thing that's actually ones and zeros in a computer, he really gets to you. He gives a beautiful emotional performance, and that's a tribute to all the artists at ILM. John brings a physical presence that's undeniable. He's a big dude. He's got arms like oak trees. He's got these giant hands. He's just this big, physically imposing presence, and that was part of what the character needed to convey as well. This guy is a pillar of strength, and he's a bulldog, and you know, once he finds his heart, he will not let go. He will pursue it doggedly. And so the physical presence needed to be an important aspect of that. Of course, John, you know, he has that when he walks through the door. But you know, one of the things I wasn't aware of before we worked together on this film was how good of an actor he was. Yeah, you know, I saw Agent Burns as, you know, as something of a funhouse mirror version of Bumblebee in a way, that he is also a creature of violence. He is also a warrior. He is someone who's lived a life of violence, and we look at what that does to someone to live a life like that. And like Bumblebee, he too has lost his empathy. He does not see Bumblebee or his prey as his quarry. He does not see it as a creature that has feelings. He sees it as, this is my job, this is my mission, that's a thing. He doesn't even connect with it as an emotional creature. And so in the same way that Bumblebee has lost his empathy, Burns has as well.